was a calm evening in the small town of Ridgewood. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. Judge Evelyn Carter, a woman known for her sharp mind and even sharper sense of justice, was driving home after a long day at court. She had spent hours listening to cases, making tough decisions, and ensuring fairness for everyone who stepped into her courtroom. But tonight, she wasn't thinking about work. She was ready to relax, maybe have a cup of tea, and unwind. Evelyn drove her car along the quiet streets, humming softly to herself. Everything seemed normal until she noticed flashing lights behind her. A police cruiser had pulled up close, its red and blue lights reflecting off her rearview mirror. She slowed down and pulled over, confused. She hadn't been speeding or breaking any rules. She was sure of it. When the officer approached her window, Evelyn rolled it down politely. Before she could say anything, the officer started talking in a tone that felt harsh and unnecessarily loud. "Do you know why I stopped you?" he asked, shining his flashlight directly into her face. Evelyn squinted against the glare and replied calmly, "No, sir. I don't believe I've done anything wrong." The officer didn't seem satisfied with her answer. He leaned closer, peering into her car as if searching for something suspicious. Then, without warning, he pointed toward her taillights. "These look cracked," he said abruptly. Evelyn glanced back at her taillights through the rearview mirror. They were perfectly fine, no cracks, no damage. She opened her mouth to explain this, but before she could speak, the officer raised his baton and slammed it hard against one of the lights. The sound of shattering glass filled the air. Evelyn's heart sank. She couldn't believe what was happening. Her calm demeanor faltered for a moment, but she quickly composed herself. This wasn't right. No matter what kind of authority this man thought he had, destroying someone's property like that wasn't acceptable. Still, she didn't argue. Instead, she watched silently as the officer scribbled on a notepad, writing her a ticket for a broken taillight. "Here," he said, handing her the slip of paper with a smug grin. "Looks like we've got ourselves a violation now." Evelyn took the ticket without saying a word. She locked eyes with him for a brief second, letting him see the fire burning behind her calm expression. Then, in a voice steady and clear, she said, "You'll regret this." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. As the officer walked back to his cruiser, Evelyn sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her mind raced. Who did this man think he was? Did he really believe he could get away with treating people this way? Evelyn knew better than most how powerful authority figures could be. But she also knew they weren't untouchable. Not when there were laws designed to keep them in check. Once the officer drove away, Evelyn took a deep breath and reminded herself to stay focused. She reached for her phone and snapped a few photos of the smashed taillight. Evidence mattered, especially in situations like this. Then she called a friend who worked in law enforcement reform. "I need advice," she said simply. Her friend listened carefully and suggested filing a formal complaint with Internal Affairs. They also encouraged her to reach out to local news outlets, knowing that stories like this often needed public attention to gain traction. That night, Evelyn barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed the scene in her head. The officer's dismissive attitude, the crack of the baton hitting her car, the smirk on his face as he handed her the ticket. But instead of letting anger consume her, she channeled it into determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly by someone in uniform. The next morning, Evelyn filed her complaint with Internal Affairs. She included the photos she'd taken along with a detailed account of what had happened. She also contacted a few trusted journalists, sharing her story with them. Within days, the incident made headlines. People were outraged, not just because of what had happened to Evelyn, but because similar stories were all too common. The fact that the victim turned out to be a respected judge added fuel to the fire, drawing even more attention to the issue. Despite the growing buzz around the case, the officer remained oblivious. He went about his routine as usual, completely unaware of the storm brewing in his direction. To him, Evelyn was just another person he'd intimidated during a traffic stop. What? He failed if. Evelyn sat in her car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The shattered taillight glinted faintly in the dim streetlight as she stared at it through her rearview mirror. She could feel anger bubbling inside her, but she pushed it down. This wasn't just about her, it was bigger than that. It was about every person who had ever been treated unfairly by someone who thought they were untouchable because of their badge. As she drove home, her mind raced with thoughts. What happened to her wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. And worse, it was meant to intimidate her. But Evelyn wasn't someone who backed down easily. She'd spent years building her reputation as a judge, standing up for people who didn't have a voice, and making sure justice prevailed no matter how hard others tried to twist it. Tonight, though, justice felt personal. When she got home, Evelyn parked her car and walked into the house. Her dog wagged its tail excitedly, happy to see her, but she barely noticed. Instead, she went straight to her study where stacks of legal books and papers lined the walls. Sitting down at her desk, she pulled out her laptop and started researching. She knew exactly what she needed to do next. File a formal complaint against the officer. But filing a complaint alone wouldn't be enough. People like him often slipped through the cracks unless there was public pressure. So Evelyn decided to take things further. She reached out to a few trusted contacts, journalists she'd worked with before on community issues. They listened carefully as she explained what happened, sending them photos of the damaged taillight and sharing details of the encounter. One reporter in particular seemed intrigued. "This could make headlines," he told her over the phone. "But are you sure you want to go public? These kinds of stories can get messy." Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Messy or not, this needs to be exposed," she said firmly. "If I don't speak up now, nothing will change." The reporter agreed to write the story, promising to include all the facts without sensationalizing anything. By morning, the article was live online, and within hours, it started gaining traction. Social media erupted with reactions. Some people praised Evelyn for standing up to abuse of power, while others accused her of exaggerating the situation. But one thing was clear: people were talking. Meanwhile, Evelyn didn't stop there. She requested body camera footage from the officer's patrol car, knowing it would hold crucial evidence. When the video arrived a few days later, she watched it closely, pausing and rewinding to catch every detail. Sure enough, it showed everything: the condescending tone, the unnecessary aggression, and most importantly, the moment when the officer deliberately smashed her taillight. It was damning proof, and Evelyn knew it would play a key role in holding him accountable. With the footage secured, Evelyn filed her official complaint with Internal Affairs, attaching the video as evidence. She also included statements from other drivers in the area who had reported similar run-ins with the same officer. Each account painted a disturbing picture of someone who used their authority to bully and intimidate civilians, especially those who looked different from him. While Evelyn worked tirelessly behind the scenes, the officer remained oblivious to the storm brewing around him. He went about his usual routine, confident that nothing would come of the traffic stop. After all, he'd dealt with complaints before, and they rarely amounted to anything serious. To him, Evelyn was just another faceless victim, a person whose voice wouldn't carry weight. But he couldn't have been more wrong. Days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely the pieces began falling into place. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying Evelyn's message far beyond Ridgewood. Community leaders called for investigations into policing practices, demanding transparency and accountability. Even local politicians weighed in, promising reforms if elected. The momentum grew stronger with each passing day, fueled by Evelyn's determination to see justice served. Through it all, Evelyn stayed focused. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she couldn't give up. Every late night spent reviewing documents, every phone call made to rally support, every interview given to keep the conversation alive. It was all part of the fight. For Evelyn, this wasn't just about fixing a broken taillight. It was about proving that no one, regardless of their position or title, was above the law. And deep down, She hoped her actions would inspire others to stand up too. Because sometimes, change starts with one person brave enough to say, "Enough is enough." The courtroom was packed that morning. People filled the rows, whispering among themselves as they waited for the proceedings to begin. Some were curious bystanders who had read about the case in the news, while others were members of the community eager to see how justice would play out. A few reporters sat near the front, notebooks ready, cameras discreetly positioned to capture every moment. The air buzzed with anticipation. Evelyn walked into the room last, her presence commanding immediate attention. She wasn't wearing her judge's robe today. This time she was here as a plaintiff, seeking accountability for what had been done to her. But even without the formal attire, there was no mistaking her authority. Her posture was straight, her expression calm but resolute. As she took her seat at the plaintiff's table, all eyes turned toward the door again, waiting for the defendant to arrive. When he finally walked in, flanked by his lawyer, the contrast between them and Evelyn couldn't have been starker. He looked nervous, glancing around the crowded room as if searching for a friendly face. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie loose like he'd dressed in a hurry. For someone used to being in control during traffic stops or confrontations, this setting clearly made him uneasy. He avoided meeting anyone's gaze, including Evelyn's, as he settled into his chair. The judge presiding over the case, a colleague of Evelyn's, called the court to order. After the initial formalities, it was time for opening statements. The officer's lawyer stood first, attempting to paint the incident as a simple misunderstanding. "This was an unfortunate accident," he argued, pacing back and forth in front of the jury. "My client may have acted hastily, but there was no malicious intent. Accidents happen, and we must consider context." Evelyn listened carefully, her face unreadable. When it was her turn to present her side, she rose slowly, taking a deep breath before beginning. Unlike the defense attorney, she didn't pace or raise her voice dramatically. Instead, she spoke directly to the judge and jury, her tone steady and sincere. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "what happened that night wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. This officer smashed my taillight intentionally, then wrote me a ticket to justify his actions. I am here today not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever felt powerless in the face of such abuse." She paused, letting her words sink in. Then she played the body camera footage for the court. The video showed everything: the aggressive tone, the unnecessary hostility, and most importantly, the moment when the baton struck her taillight. Gasps rippled through the audience as they watched. Evelyn pointed out specific details: the smirk on the officer's face after breaking the light, the dismissive way he handed her the ticket as evidence of his mindset. "This isn't just about one traffic stop," she continued. "It's about patterns of behavior. My car wasn't the first victim, and unless something changes, it won't be the last." Her argument was compelling, backed by logic and emotion. In equal measure, she presented additional evidence too: testimonies from other drivers who had encountered similar treatment, internal complaints filed against the officer over the years, and statistics showing disproportionate targeting of minority communities in traffic stops. Each piece of evidence added weight to her case, painting a damning picture of someone who abused their power repeatedly without consequences. The officer's lawyer tried to counter, questioning whether the video truly proved malice and suggesting Evelyn might be exaggerating her claims, but his arguments felt weak compared to the mountain of proof Evelyn had laid out. Even the jurors seemed skeptical, exchanging glances and scribbling notes throughout the trial. As closing arguments approached, Evelyn delivered a final statement that left no room for doubt. Standing tall, she addressed the court once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice firm, "justice is blind, but it is also fair. It sees past titles, badges, and excuses. What happened to me that night wasn't justice, it was oppression disguised as authority. If we allow this kind of behavior to go unchecked, we fail not only ourselves but future generations who deserve better." Her words resonated deeply. When she sat down, the courtroom fell silent, the gravity of her message hanging heavy in the air. The officer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, visibly sweating now. For the first time, he seemed to realize the enormity of the situation, and the fact that he had underestimated the woman sitting across from him. After hours of deliberation, the verdict came back, guilty on multiple counts of misconduct and abuse of power. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, some cheering quietly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Evelyn remained composed, nodding slightly as the decision was announced. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever felt silenced or dismissed by those sworn to protect them. But Evelyn knew this was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, turning this victory into lasting change. As she gathered her papers and prepared to leave, she glanced at the officer one last time. There was no anger in her gaze, only determination. This case wasn't personal, it was a step toward a bigger goal. And Evelyn wasn't done fighting yet. The verdict sent shockwaves through Ridgewood, rippling far beyond the walls of the courtroom. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story, a respected judge taking on a rogue officer and winning. Social media exploded with reactions, hashtags trending as people weighed in from all sides. Supporters hailed Evelyn as a hero, someone who had stood up to abuse of power and proven that no one was above accountability. Critics, however, accused her of using her position for personal revenge, claiming the punishment didn't fit the crime. For Evelyn, the attention was overwhelming but not entirely unexpected. She knew going public meant opening herself up to scrutiny, both positive and negative. Still, she refused to let the noise distract her. What mattered most to her wasn't the applause or the backlash. It was the message behind the case. This wasn't just about one bad officer. It was about exposing a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for too long. In the days following the trial, community meetings sprang up across Ridgewood. People gathered in libraries, churches, and town halls to discuss what had happened and how to move forward. Some residents shared their own stories of mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement, revealing a troubling trend. One older woman recounted being pulled over repeatedly for minor infractions, always feeling targeted because of her race. A young man talked about being stopped late at night while walking home, questioned aggressively despite doing nothing wrong. These accounts painted a picture of fear and frustration, highlighting the need for change. Evelyn attended several of these meetings, listening intently as people spoke. Though she could have stayed silent, letting others take the lead, she chose to engage. When given the microphone, she addressed the crowd with warmth and sincerity. "I'm here today not because I want praise," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here because I believe we can do better, for ourselves, for our children, and for this community. Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing, it's about creating systems that protect everyone equally." Her words resonated deeply, earning nods and murmurs of agreement. Inspired by her courage, many attendees vowed to keep pushing for reform. They formed committees to review policing practices, organize workshops on racial bias, and advocate for policy changes at the local level. Evelyn became a guiding figure in these efforts, offering advice and support wherever needed. She worked tirelessly behind the scenes, connecting activists with resources and helping draft proposals aimed at increasing transparency within law enforcement. But not everyone welcomed the push for change. Some officers bristled at the idea of stricter oversight, arguing that their jobs were already difficult enough without added scrutiny. Others dismissed the calls for reform as unnecessary, insisting that incidents like the one involving Evelyn were rare exceptions rather than part of a larger problem. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at times. One particularly heated moment came during a town hall meeting when a group of uniformed officers showed up, clearly unhappy about the direction of the conversation. As residents voiced their concerns, one officer interrupted, his tone sharp. "We're out there every day risking our lives to keep you safe," he said, pointing at the crowd. "And now you're accusing us of being criminals?" The room fell, silent for a beat before Evelyn stepped forward. She looked the officer squarely in the eye, her expression calm but firm. "No one is calling you a criminal," she replied evenly. "What we're asking for is accountability. You risk your lives to serve and protect, That's true, but when trust breaks down between the police and the community, everyone suffers. We're not enemies, we're partners. And partnership requires mutual respect. Her response diffused the tension, at least temporarily. The officer nodded reluctantly, retreating to his seat without another word. It was a small victory, but an important one. Evelyn understood that real progress wouldn't come overnight. Building bridges would take time, patience, and a willingness to listen, even when it was hard. Meanwhile, the fallout for the officer involved in Evelyn's case continued to unfold. Stripped of his badge and sentenced to community service, he struggled to find work. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, embarrassed by association. Rumors swirled about his behavior before the incident, with former co-workers admitting they'd noticed warning signs but never reported them. He was always quick to anger, one officer confided to a reporter. But nobody wanted to rock the boat. Despite the consequences he faced, some still defended him, insisting he'd been made into a scapegoat. Online forums buzzed with debates, dividing opinions further. Yet for every person who sympathized with the officer, there were dozens more who saw the ruling as a long overdue wake-up call. Parents used the story to teach their kids about standing up for what's right. Teachers incorporated discussions about systemic injustice into their lesson plans. Even local businesses joined the movement, hosting fundraisers to support organizations working toward police reform. Through it all, Evelyn remained a steady presence, refusing to let the momentum fade. She gave interviews, wrote op-eds, and partnered with advocacy groups to amplify marginalized voices. Her message was simple yet powerful. Justice isn't something you achieve once and then forget about. It's an ongoing process that demands vigilance and action. As weeks turned into months, the impact of her efforts became undeniable. City. Officials announced plans to implement body cameras for all officers, along with mandatory training sessions on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. Community policing initiatives launched, encouraging officers to build relationships with residents instead of viewing them as potential threats. Slowly but surely, Ridgewood began to heal, yet Evelyn knew the fight wasn't over. While progress had been made in her small town, similar battles raged elsewhere. Across the country, communities grappled with questions of accountability, fairness, and trust. For Evelyn, this realization only strengthened her resolve. She couldn't single-handedly fix everything, but she could continue shining a light on issues that mattered and inspiring others to join the cause. Late one evening, as she sat in her study reviewing notes for an upcoming panel discussion, Evelyn paused to reflect. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with setbacks and resistance. But she also knew that moments like this, the chance to make a difference, were why she'd become a judge in the first place. Justice wasn't easy, but it was worth fighting for. And fight she would, one step at a time. The ripple effects of Evelyn's case reached far beyond Ridgewood, sparking conversations that many had long avoided. What began as a single incident, a shattered taillight and an arrogant officer, had grown into something much larger, a movement for accountability and reform. People across the country took notice, inspired by Evelyn's courage and determination. Her story became a symbol of resilience, proving that even those in positions of power could be held accountable if someone was brave enough to stand up. In Ridgewood itself, the changes were slow but steady. The city council, under mounting pressure from residents, introduced sweeping reforms aimed at rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the community. One of the first measures implemented was the mandatory use of body cameras by all officers. This wasn't just about transparency. It was about creating a record that couldn't be ignored or twisted. Every interaction would now be documented, making it harder for misconduct to go unnoticed. Training programs also underwent a major overhaul. Officers attended workshops focused on de-escalation techniques, learning how to resolve conflicts without resorting to aggression. These sessions weren't easy. Some officers pushed back, claiming they didn't need lessons on how to do their jobs, but others embraced the opportunity to grow, realizing that better communication could lead to safer outcomes for everyone involved. Cultural sensitivity training became another key component, teaching officers to recognize unconscious biases and challenge stereotypes that might influence their actions. Evelyn played a crucial role in shaping these initiatives. She worked closely with local leaders, offering insights drawn from her years of experience in the courtroom. Her approach was practical, yet compassionate. "We're not here to punish anyone," she often said during meetings. "We're here to create a system that works for officers, for citizens, for everyone." Her ability to balance firmness with empathy earned her respect, even among skeptics who initially doubted her intentions. But perhaps the most impactful change came through community policing efforts. Instead of viewing residents as potential suspects, officers were encouraged to see them as partners. Regular meet-and-greet events brought cops and civilians together in informal settings: picnics, block parties, and school assemblies. At first, the interactions felt awkward, with both sides unsure of how to bridge the gap. But over time, relationships began to form. Kids started waving at officers instead of crossing the street to avoid them. Parents shared concerns directly, knowing their voices would be heard. One particularly memorable moment came during a neighborhood cleanup event. A young boy approached an officer, holding out a crumpled piece of paper. "I drew this for you," he said shyly, handing over a crayon sketch of a police car surrounded by smiling stick figures. The officer knelt down, his expression softening as he thanked the child. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the progress being made. Of course, not everything went smoothly. Resistance lingered in certain corners, especially among veteran officers who resented the new policies. Some grumbled openly about political correctness and unnecessary rules, while others quietly resisted behind closed doors. Tensions occasionally flared, particularly when disciplinary actions were taken against repeat offenders within the force. Yet despite these challenges, the overall tone began to shift. Accountability became less of a threat and more of a standard, a non-negotiable part of the job. Outside of Ridgewood, Evelyn's case inspired similar movements nationwide. Activists cited her victory as proof that systemic change was possible, even in places where inertia seemed impossible to overcome. Town halls hosted screenings of documentaries featuring interviews with Evelyn and other advocates. Schools incorporated lessons on civic responsibility, using her story to teach students about the importance of speaking up against injustice. Social media campaigns gained traction, urging people to demand reforms in their own communities. For Evelyn, the spotlight brought both pride and humility. She rarely sought recognition, preferring to focus on the work rather than the accolades. Still, she understood the value of visibility, of showing others that standing up for justice wasn't futile. When invited to speak at conferences or appear on television, she accepted graciously, using each platform to amplify her message. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she reminded audiences. "It takes patience, persistence, and a willingness to listen. But if we keep pushing, we'll get there." Her words carried weight because they came from experience. Evelyn hadn't just talked about fairness. She'd lived it, fought for it, and endured the consequences. Her journey resonated deeply with people from all walks of life, reminding them that ordinary individuals could spark extraordinary transformations. As months passed, Evelyn noticed subtle shifts in Ridgewood's atmosphere. Conversations that once centered around fear and mistrust now leaned toward hope and collaboration. Residents reported feeling safer, more confident in their interactions with law enforcement. Officers, too, expressed relief at seeing tensions ease. "It's nice to know people don't automatically assume the worst about us," one patrolman admitted during a community forum. "We're human beings, just like everyone else." Even so, Evelyn remained vigilant. She knew that progress was fragile, easily undone by complacency or resistance. So she continued advocating, pushing for further reforms and encouraging others to stay engaged. She founded a mentorship program pairing young activists with seasoned leaders, ensuring that the next generation would carry the torch. She also partnered with researchers to study the impact of recent changes, gathering data to refine strategies moving forward. Through it all, Evelyn never lost sight of why she'd started this fight. It wasn't about revenge or personal glory. It was about protecting the vulnerable, empowering the voiceless, and holding power accountable. Each victory, no matter how small, reinforced her belief that justice was worth fighting for. Late one evening, as she walked through her quiet neighborhood, Evelyn paused beneath a street lamp. The glow illuminated her face, highlighting the lines etched by years of hard work and determination. She thought back to the night her taillight was smashed, the anger, the frustration, the resolve. That moment had changed her life, yes, but it had also changed countless others. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, she felt a deep sense of peace knowing she'd done everything in her power to make things right. With a soft smile, she turned and headed home, ready to rest. But only for tonight. Tomorrow there would be more work to do. Years passed, and the story of Evelyn's fight for justice became more than just a memory. It evolved into a legacy. People didn't just remember her as the judge whose taillight was smashed. They remembered her as the woman who refused to stay silent. Her courage inspired countless others to take a stand, whether it was against unfair treatment or systemic inequities that had long gone unchallenged. In Ridgewood and beyond, her name became synonymous with resilience, fairness, and unwavering determination. The changes she helped spark continued to grow, taking root in ways no one could have predicted. The reforms implemented in Ridgewood served as a blueprint for other towns and cities grappling with similar issues. Law enforcement agencies began adopting policies modeled after those introduced locally. Body cameras, cultural sensitivity, training and community policing programs spread like wildfire. Even state legislatures took notice, passing laws aimed at increasing accountability within police departments. It was clear that Evelyn's case had ignited something much bigger than anyone anticipated. In Ridgewood itself, the transformation was remarkable. What was once a divided community started coming together piece by piece. Trust between residents and law enforcement slowly rebuilt brick by brick. Officers were now seen patrolling neighborhoods not as enforcers but as protectors, people who genuinely cared about the safety and well-being of those they served. Kids waved hello instead of running away. Parents stopped avoiding eye contact when an officer approached. Conversations that once carried tension now flowed naturally, filled with mutual respect. Evelyn remained deeply involved in these efforts, though her role shifted over time. She transitioned from being the face of the movement to becoming its quiet backbone. Behind the scenes, she mentored young activists, guiding them on how to navigate the complexities of advocacy without losing sight of their values. "Don't let setbacks discourage you," she often told them. "Change is messy and progress isn't linear, but every step forward matters." Her mentorship extended beyond activism. She worked tirelessly to ensure that marginalized voices weren't drowned out in discussions about reform. Whether it was organizing town halls specifically for underrepresented groups or pushing for diversity in hiring practices within local government, Evelyn made sure everyone had a seat at the table. Her mantra was simple: justice isn't justice unless it includes everyone. As the years went by, Evelyn's influence reached far beyond Ridgewood. National organizations invited her to speak at conferences, where she shared insights gleaned from her experiences. Journalists sought her out for interviews, eager to capture her thoughts on everything from police reform to broader social justice issues. Documentaries featured her journey, highlighting how one person's actions could inspire widespread change. Yet despite the recognition, Evelyn stayed grounded. To her, the real heroes were the everyday people standing up for what was right. The teachers, parents, students, and workers who refused to accept injustice. One particularly poignant moment came during a national awards ceremony honoring leaders in civil rights. As Evelyn stepped onto the stage to accept her award, the audience erupted into applause. For a brief second, she stood there, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of support. Then, composing herself, she addressed the crowd. "This isn't my victory," she said, her voice steady yet warm. "It belongs to everyone who has ever dared to dream of a better world, and then worked tirelessly to make it happen." Justice isn't something we achieve alone. It's something we build together. Her words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. That night, countless viewers tuned in to watch the broadcast, many moved to tears by her humility and wisdom. Social media lit up with messages of gratitude, with hashtags like "Me Thank You Evelyn" trending nationwide. People shared stories of how her example had motivated them to take action in their own lives. One woman wrote about starting a neighborhood watch group after feeling empowered by Evelyn's message. A teenager posted a video of himself speaking at a school assembly about racial equality, crediting Evelyn for inspiring him to find his voice. Back in Ridgewood, life settled into a new rhythm, one marked by hope rather than fear. Community events flourished, drawing people of all ages and backgrounds. Art exhibits showcased work celebrating unity and resilience. Music festivals brought neighbors together, filling parks with laughter and song. Even the annual 4th of July parade took on a fresh meaning, with floats dedicated to themes of justice and inclusion. For Evelyn, these moments were reminders of why she'd fought so hard. Seeing her community thrive gave her a sense of fulfillment that no courtroom victory ever could. Still, she never allowed herself to become complacent. Every morning she woke up aware that there was still work to be done. Whether it was mentoring young leaders, reviewing policy proposals, or simply listening to someone share their struggles, Evelyn remained committed to the cause. As she grew older, her pace slowed slightly, but her passion never wavered. Friends and colleagues often joked that retirement wasn't in her vocabulary. "Why would I retire?" she'd laugh. "There's too much left to do." And they knew she meant it. Even in her later years, she attended meetings, wrote articles, and advocated for change with the same fervor she'd shown decades earlier. Eventually, Evelyn's health began to decline, forcing her to scale back her activities. But even then, her spirit endured. On days when she couldn't leave the house, she hosted virtual gatherings, connecting with activists across the globe. Her living room became a hub of ideas and collaboration, proof that age and physical limitations couldn't dim her light. When Evelyn passed away, the entire community mourned. Flags flew at half-mast and flowers piled high outside her home. Tributes poured in from around the world, each one echoing the same sentiment. Evelyn had changed lives, not through grand gestures, but through consistent, heartfelt action. She had shown people that justice wasn't some distant ideal. It was something they could create, one decision at a time. Her funeral was a celebration of life, attended by hundreds. Speakers included former adversaries who had come to admire her integrity, young activists she'd mentored, and ordinary citizens whose lives she'd touched. One speaker summed it up perfectly. "Evelyn taught us that standing up for what's right isn't easy, but it's always worth it." She didn't just fight for justice, she embodied it. Today, Evelyn's legacy lives on. Streets bear her name, scholarships honor her memory, and schools teach lessons based on her principles. But perhaps her greatest impact lies in the hearts of those she inspired. Across generations, people continue to carry her torch, fighting for fairness and equality wherever they see injustice. They know the road ahead won't always be smooth, but they also know they're not alone. Because somewhere, Evelyn's quiet strength still whispers, "Keep going. The world needs you."